All right. Thank you. Yeah. You did a good job. All right, let's do it. So we'll start with Lamrim Kappa Guru Yoga.
Page 7. From the heart, say to the 100 deities of Geshe on the peak of the fire, resembling that path of extreme white pressure. King of Dharma, omniscient voice on the earth, please come here together with your son. In the sky of all and light from my perfect yoga response to light, supreme yoga merit woman, please abide by 100 eons to spread the teaching. Your holy mind has the intelligence that understands and understands objects to be know your Holy Spirit with his excellent explanations is a ear ornament for those of your fortune. Your holy Bible is gracious to be full with glory and renown to you who are meaningful to sit here and remember my estate. Please drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, lights, and waters, and so forth. Oceans of flower-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated, I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the I have collected from beginning of time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strive for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and make your freedoms and riches as meaningful by abandoning the ego's concerns. Say that you sincerely rejoice in your extensive genius. Perfect, pure, holy Guru, from the beginning of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharma side. Please let fall a rain of the vast and extensive Dharma on the receptacle of those to be subdued, exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigrating beings. And in particular, may it cause the essence of perfect, pure, unconscious teachings to shine forth. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa,
I'm a feminist.
Practice and actualize the teachings and employs one person
Freedom, morality, and encouraging the sensitive conduct of the sons of victorious class and accomplish the yoga to state.
By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beings of white light are emitted from the heart of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one enter my crown. White nectar with orange milk flows from the opening of the tube of white light,
Cleansing all my sickness, spirit, heart, negative comments, aspirations, and without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal.
Page 13 for the 5 line similar 3 times these 5 lines.
Sangye Jadon Tsoji Jonam La Janchu Badu Dami Kyasuch Dagi Chushegi Betsonam Roba Eche Sangye Tokash Sangye Jadon Tsoji Jonam La Janchu Badu Dami Kyasuch Dagi Chushegi Betsonam Roba Eche Sangye Tokash Sangye Chodan Soki Chodan La Chanchu Badu Dami Kasich Dagi Chushigi Betsonam Dola Peche Sangye Dola Kanki Tuzi Nizuni Tawa Tamji Tombi Chewe Kanki Chini Dingi Kodam Jela Changzi Good morning, everyone.
So good morning, everyone, and particularly to Mila. Touch the Mila.
Manche Kingras, yep, and Shambhala.
Yeah. So, it is probably that most of you know the father, Jampa, and the mother, Lucy.
And can you Melalia, send Melas a Mongwa, and it is a Mela Nansing with the Kasota and the Kanji Nanta Jibin Le Tang and Chile Jones Tambala, and Jimmy Hamani, mean Tower Nansing, Javjursi where the kitchen were.
So you called your daughter Mila after Milarepa, right? So if there comes a time in which Mila decides to relinquish the world and to pursue her own spiritual path, to attain the state of enlightenment, Geshe is hoping that you guys will be supportive.
One did about that, Pamagi and Chu Nedi Yaguch Mashina, and it Pugu Church area, Gabgurch, the Kakuchi was. And these are the any Melakawa Sanshijaya, and Yap, the Chu Nedi, Yun Giants, any and Momba Paming Tommy, Morang Church area, Gabgur Geshe Jatambaris. The children didn't sing in Jimbana, children didn't want to and it Yimbana, Jassijatam, Jagir tourists, but they never Mashiti, Mashibi only, and it could win the Doma to it. Sanjichu and the Sudas.
So in general, when we look at family situation, when the parents, when parents understand the essential points within the Dhamma, it's easy to extend a sense of support to the child if that's their spiritual path of spiritual inclination. Whereas, as parents, if you don't understand those essential points in the Dhamma, it's hard to really be supportive of someone that decides to follow that path. So then, Jampa has been with us for many years and developed good understanding. So Geshe reckons that in terms of offering support, if this is what Mila chooses to do, then that's the support will be there. It's important that at least for us in general, that we develop an understanding of the Dhamma as much as we can, because without developing an understanding of those essential points within the Dhamma, it'd be difficult to make a great progress.
And thing I'm Mizigi, is Ratidanga Yesa and you permanent such a cook your shoes and double over here in young. Chick Pama, we have done which in power deep and a chamanizing that children Korea and it Tawache and it's getting the good dates in then be young over here. Then something examination and not only but this check what is this is the Sambala. Puchiki or and it's long big page of Netland, Hachang Jung. Who really Yaka Kolochi, the Google Kolochi, Colony have Peshi Yomaris. Ned the Digital Netan Yobani, and we had to tunnel shown the day. Puchi Penjo Raya, Tavita, Penjo Rasaji, Ayani, Kono singing, so in Yomaris. And the chick Tawaji, Tulachi, Tawachina, some model, so in Yomaris, Kasna, Korangi, which Chavit Nedampi, Chunju Korea, Gombalanto, and it Chavit Nedam, and chicken color mountain, most of assembly with Zambala, and Manzoria, Korea, Nang Junzinchi, the Nang Benjo to Missing Benjo Tolia, and it seemed to never. The church area, Yagir Shigurist, the garden again, and Aranda in the Tassel in the Lomos in the Yet, giving me something material there, showing at the garden deep, And so to serve Hamal to the shots.
And Geshe can say that based upon his own personal experience. So being born in Tibet into a family of nomads, he was supported by his parents. His father, in some sense, had some similarities with Jampa. So his father, in an early stage of his life, was a monk. Then at some point he left monasticism and became a family person. He had 10 kids that were, they have 10 kids in the family, or he fathered 10 kids, and he was still very devout. So he not only understood quite a lot of the Dharma, but also even in terms of his personal practice, he memorized the sadhanas for the three main deities within the Gelug tradition: Guhya Samaja, Chakasambhara, Vajrabharava. So all of that was at the tip of his fingers, and the family did not enjoy like great material prosperity. Actually, they lived quite a simple and poor way of living. So the kids, for example, had 2 sets of clothes. There was a winter set and a summer set. And in between, it's not that they had a few sets to change or to exchange. Basically, that was it. Summer clothes or summer set and the winter set. And yet, it's not that the main way of thinking was how can we get more or find more? Maybe send one of the kids out to make some money so that the family could have more possessions. Rather than thinking about it like that, the motivation that exists in the family was that at some point, they become monastics. In that there was an appreciation of becoming a monk or a nun, spending a life as a monk or a nun, entering into a monastery, studying from a lama, a spiritual teacher. And rather than focusing on external wealth, the focus was on the development of inequalities in the wealth. So since that was the attitude in Geshe's family, he made it also to become a monk when he was young. Then he's made his way to India and encounter his own root teacher and also other teachers, incredible spiritual teachers. And all of that was made possible through the support of his parents.
Other than on the cutting something, long something more shooting is rock, and it's something Nimam, you can patient to triple. Even the cute shown Jim, Chukono, Kyochin, Kundroino, Kyochin, Lambi, Chomi, Cho Jim, Tony, Langan, Shin, Honey, Chachibushina said, Chigushina, Kyosu Superchi, the Triple, Gobachi, Yodi. The third Kyochunjin and Tony, no Makibayan, Rani Kyochin, Kitchen, Magician, Low Rap Jim Tasunda, Hinchos.
Having said that, let's go back to the text. We've been looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's middling presentation of the status of the path of enlightenment. So in the previous sessions, we looked at the set of reasons that explain why students are led according to that sequence of the status of the path of the small, the medium, and the great scope. Today, we're going to begin with the purpose of leading students in this way. So there are 2 main points in that section. First of all, stating the actual purpose and then stating the sources for that. When we begin with the actual purpose of leading students in this way, let's try to make the text slightly bigger for those of you who are visually challenged. So it begins with posing a question. If the Dhamma cycles of persons of small and medium capacity are the preliminary practices of persons of great capacity, it should indeed be all right to consider them the stages of the path of persons of great capacity. What is the use of the phrase, the stages of the path in common with persons of small and medium capacity, in the sense of what is the point in using those terms? The stages of the path that are shared with those of the medium, of the small capacity. The stages of the path which are shared with those of the medium capacity. Now, to answer that, it begins with stating that there are two major purposes for classifying and guiding three kinds of beings. It says, the first one, in this way, the conceit of, did I read through that? No, actually, let's stop with that.
Sem Geshe Chigioris. That Katrusiki Yaji, Sem Gachumba, Karchigore Islandi, and Magichu Sudum said that Yajim Songo said. Kanji Sanji Michu, Zavadopi, and Magichu Sudum Soma, Tini teaching that, and Yadrogas.
So I should have read through some of the answer. Let's read through that. There are two major purposes for classifying and guiding three kinds of beings. In this way, one, the conceit of claiming oneself to be a person of great capacity, while the mental attitudes common to persons of small and medium capacity have not even arisen, that conceit is overcome. And the second is that all three, the highest, intermediate, and the least mental attitudes, have great benefits. So some of you might be new to this presentation of the sense of the path of the three types of beings. At least in Tibetan, they are called the small, the medium, and the great beings. So if you're not used to this presentation, you might be thinking that it's awkward to label practitioners in this way, the small, the medium, and the great. Whereas those of you who've had such teachings before, Geshe reckons that you already have some understanding of why do we call those practitioners by those names. In short, it has to do with the mental disposition of those practitioners, how vast and extensively they can think. There are those who can think with a very broad state of mind, wide and extensive. There are those who have a medium capacity to do that. And there are those who have a rather narrow perspective over what they want to accomplish in their practice. So the bare minimum would be of those of the small, or you could say more narrow state of mind, which are focusing at the very least on guarding pure ethical discipline, which abstains from the 10 non-virtues.
Chidang shushu kohe medidiro. Ne samni stamayna pe nenga yukuska. Ani mugichumu to be moon ton shawdi. Inchi gipi yeti. And susu be sonke maiba. And shen ya nutse panyach. Shen ya nutse chimushavat. Sumudas.
So the base of our practice of those states of the path is abstaining from the 10 non-virtues, adopting ethical discipline which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. So if you don't think about it deeply, it might seem to be quite arbitrary, in that it's not a big deal just to guard ethical discipline. But then when you start to think about it more deeply, you come to see that guarding ethical discipline is not mainly about guarding yourself. It's about it's mainly abstaining from harming others. That is the main purpose, to abstain from harming others.
And it's a form of and it's some of the times Kadu and Chichala maneuvers, Chindo Mundo, the some time, Liu Tony and Nag Tony, the Shango time, and to Samlia, and to Marama Samdia, Kindi Giton, and Shinju Yabu Chevan, and so big, and Namasanji will chew Chile, soon do, and Namasanji will chew Chigi Sanji, Nargi Cho do, Logedi, and in the Rasadas, Hirago does Kanji.
So if you think to yourself, I am a follower of the Buddha, the Bhagavan. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I see myself as Buddhist and so forth. Then what you need to look at is your behavior, your actions in body, speech, and mind, and to assess whether the way that you behave is by and large focused only on yourself, or whether in your behavior you're placing an emphasis, or you emphasize the abstention from harming others. So ask yourself, am I behaving in a way that is harmful to others? My physical, verbal, and mental actions, are they effective? Do I affect others? Are they harmful to others? So if your practice is based upon this attitude in which you inquire whether your actions do affect others and how they are detrimental to others, and as much as you can, you try to abstain from harming others, it means that you, in that sense, enter into the ranks of Buddhist practitioners. So through that, then you assess your mental states, whether you're affected by pride, whether you're affected by a sense of putting a focus on yourself, a sense of centered attitude while disregarding others. So it's important to really look deeply and assess our attitude with respect to the things that we do, to our behavior. Are we deliberately trying to abstain from others, to abstain from harming others, or are we still mainly focusing just on ourselves?
Things are and Chomden de and this reader, the Kanjing on the Chomden de Pay and the Sangiris, Pen, Tare, Love and Tonsa Mavaji, Shasha, and Chomden de Mijigoda. One turning Michi, Zambin the Naya, Nanduna Shin, that's Amikoban, the kitchen, Zambin, Midi, Kandaji, Slavana, Changu Tanjans, Rangi, and it launch of shadow. And she layer and chokjum chedea and zaman chedea, sawing in the mind. Rangi digi chedo, shan go hortan, mavi sheding, sawing in the mind. Rangi digi chedo, and shanlaya, maron with sem changu, in the sawing in the mind. Kanji and jen chevan zinding, kiwich kimbadi, sew shoes. It's the tongue on the just drawing Slavoni and Tampo tangents chegoeti. Pemassive kitchen board, Tambutan Chigo, Pemassive kitchen board. Kanji number 3 Jim by now, Mitambuji Chavios that. So that the only time they had this.
Looking at the way that we relate to the Buddha. Now, if we relate to the Buddha in thinking that the Buddha is the Bhagavan, someone that is elevated to a godly state, to the point in which it is impossible even to see what a Buddha is. Well, you're creating a distance or a gap in your mind between yourself and what a Buddha is. So rather than thinking about it like that, then the Buddha was a human being, born to a mother, just like us, but was able through his practice to develop an utmost sincerity and honesty and truthfulness in the way that he acted. So not trying to get what he wanted, what he needed, if it came at the expense of others, not through deceit and cheating and bullying others in order to get what he wanted. As much as he could, the Buddha was also behaving in a way, so I shouldn't say as much as, but the Buddha was behaving in a way that was honest and truthful, not just for his own sake, but also in order to make sure that he abstains from harming others. So how do we behave? Do we, as Buddhists, followers of the Buddha, do we behave in the same way? It's important to assess that. It's important to make sure that in our behavior, we develop similar attitudes, which are honest, sincere, and truthful. And if we do that, then we become fully fledged Buddhist practitioners.
백 직신 cham종치에 직부치도 모두지 아니 수수 대두려야지 아니 싸우니 상도 마당 소리 제였습니다 디 싸우니 제요 말was 여기 지금 주좀 송한디 안지 ngo동디 현의 cham종 넘바 임바지려야 대응 오마디 소소려야 케빈 지어딩지 난줄려야 고야디 그나 디기려스 먼저 소찬 로를 두고 나기 되기 되기까지 라운 치슈디 아니 나다 미 때문에 연구여라서 어딘지 교포선 저거냐 아니 너기 지금 수정을 풀대봐 아니 디기지 아니 르슨 데보 용에 대한 조 아니 셈바 피기 팍 배우지다 아니 시대 여버들이야 쉬우지 라래 되봐 아니 셈바 팍 배우 시대 용야 디 자주 마페바 마기바 용야 디 자주 nember 때니 마기바 용도 자주 nember 폰디 란신 디 셈르르 셈키우치 셈르르 셈키우여바나 텔라 템비기 아니 류데보 용야지 간지 무기 지금 수준 소야지 란신 칸다 때느냐 데기 무슨 소리 유임바티 세우 슈지데사스라.
Now, you might have that idea that ethical discipline is practiced just in order to protect others, just in order to care for others, whereas it's not actually related to my happiness and my well-being. So if you have that idea that I practice ethical discipline just in order to care for others, and it doesn't have any bearing on me, on my happiness and my well-being, this is certainly not the case. It's not the case because when we look at the things that we do seek, we will seek to be happy, we seek to be well. And the greater happiness and well-being is afforded by a highest state of rebirth, a higher state of rebirth as a human being, for example. So the main foundation for that state of rebirth is ethical discipline. So there's a great benefit, great personal benefit from protecting others, from caring for others. So not only that, when we develop a set of mind that is relaxed, that is spacious, that is at peace, it contributes a great deal to our happiness and well-being. Our happiness and well-being depends upon that. Whereas if the mind is not relaxed, if it's not at ease, our mind becomes, we develop negative states of mind, and then we behave in a negative way. So developing positive states of mind which are at ease, that are relaxed, that are peaceful, also affects our behavior. And altogether, it gives us a great personal benefit, a great personal profit in terms of being able to live more happily with a greater degree of well-being as human beings.
And the give one time manor and Magichum Gutsurum and building Kansadi and Kyochung that and Lamrim Lojong Davos of the Chagadas and the Kyochung is somebody so indigenous.
So then being able to secure a succession of good rebirths in a pleasant state of existence is what is taught in the sense of the path of those of the small scope, developing unmistaken causes for taking such rebirths and making effort in that through cultivating ethical discipline, which abstains from the 10 non-virtues. That is so within the sense of the path of those of the small scope.
That this Shilashabton, you choose somebody Shilashabton, Manju Samgong, they were down, do not know their body, and Tanjishivan, and Manzu to Sosa, your daughter, Chief Green by that. Susulaya, they were doing top down, Susu Dunga say, top down deep, then Daniel Yo in that, and they were doing David Yukarimba, and do not say, do not be Karimba, do not call them Jungu of thinking for the song down, and two deep, and Maron in Sam, and Chadam was on the tenny, Manzu Dunga Jungu Yoga. In the Dunga Teletrovalia, use our Chadam Monson. And Dogo do Slavita, Kanji, and you drink samba. You drink samba says, so he told this.
So using the sense of the path of those of the small scope as a basis for our practice, we then go on and develop the sense of the path of those of the medium scope, in which we recognize that all of us as living beings, all of us have the same basic wish to be happy and not to suffer. Not only all of us are equal in terms of seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering and pain, also all of us are equal in terms of having the right to be happy and to avoid suffering. And that being the case, the question arises, what are the causes that we need to cultivate that result in happiness? And what are the causes that lead to suffering? And those are the things that we mainly deal with when we follow the steps of the path of those of the medium scope, in recognizing that ill-managed state of mind, anger, attachment, and ignorance are those states which result in suffering. And once we recognize that anger, attachment, and ignorance are those states of mind that end up in the personal suffering that we experience, we then develop the wish to emerge from that state. We develop what is called in English renunciation, or more precisely, the determination to live cyclic existence, which is the main thing that you do when you follow the steps of the path of those of the medium scope.
And give somebody, the machine is your not give on tissue. The give somebody run do not cover some jigmeba. And she surgeon Tanjilaya, they give go your body. I mean, run like a pani, run a pani, and surgeon Tanjilaya, they give go your body. They give go your body. And surgeon Tanjilaya, can do Dubina, Chavadilla Chimbuimba, that Chimbuimba. And she ranking mark tribute and in Dina, he go over. The consciousness of the big over seen tea, Penley, so she ranching which is some day of my boss, Sinja Tanji Penley, meaning, and Pita, Sinja Tanji tender 2 inch, and usually Julia better cheating in the and give chimbus, and directions, the dodos.
And then we have the steps of the path of those of the great scope of great being, in which we do not think only of our own happiness and well-being, but we also consider that all sentient beings want to be happy. So we think that my goal actually is not just to accomplish my own happiness and well-being, but to accomplish happiness for the sake of all sentient beings. To accomplish happiness and bliss for the sake of all sentient beings who we consider through a certain process as being our mothers since time without beginning and up until now in cyclic existence. And therefore our priority or focus changes, not just looking at our own needs or goals, but to think of, since all sentient beings desire happiness, then I'm going to accomplish happiness for the sake of all sentient beings, all living beings. Those are the stages that you follow when you practice the steps of the path of those of the great scope.
These are that, and give chimbu somebody, he will drink somebody, he will drink somebody, he will chew somebody, things are, and remember that the young boy. You give chimbu with Yamlis Lounge, and me corona then bed, and shoes rest something, and give chew the dingy to go jump to Laya, some matan, give chimbu, no jumping, Slavina. She can't love something tenderly, can't make it. In the give chew the dingy somebody, two go. He chimbu in but any the river corang Tommy, and she answered this.
So in that sense, the intention of a great scope being depends upon the intention of the medium scope. And that in turn, the intention of a medium scope practitioner depends upon the intention of a small scope practitioner. So it's important to recognize that, because if you're going to think that I'm not interested in the steps of the path of those of the small and the medium scope, what I am going to develop is the intention or the thought of a great scope being. Well, you're just saying that, but you'll be incapable of doing that, because the way of thinking of a great scope depends upon the development of the way of thinking of the medium scope, and in turn, that depends upon the way of thinking of those of the small scope. So if we are inclined to practice the steps of the path of those of the great scope, what we also need to train our mind at is the steps of the path of those of that are shared with those of the small scope and those of the medium scope.
That chelo is skill common ila mondo the tower to new baby. And Jiwa Chedi, Kansa Chendi Nilaya, Sanji Salaya, Tayo Kombali, Jiwa Chedi, Kansa Chendi Nilaya, Penny Samba Joma, and it Temba came with the Mingushi, Sanji Temba, came with the Mingushi, Yondi Gibi Chedan, Yondi Koma Gibi, and it's our deep, and Yondi Omalaya, two Deva, or Vindiris, Yondi Gibi Chedan. Kansa kama shiginani koma neken janja samba koma megilas that big re kansa kama sanada big aniki hajangi momba shujembo ani chaba shujembo ani chedan da chadolo so shujembo shujimba ina ani da mi shembala ya nyingmaro mani di ani nelu shingmaro nelu mashino samba koma kieri tambegi. And
it continues in saying the way in which they are great is that since the two more advanced beings also need to strive for higher states and liberation, there is no fault in teaching great or intermediate individuals who are to be guided how to train in thoughts of those two, because excellent qualities are developed. Which means, in short, Geshe said, if you want to develop greater qualities, you will do so through developing lesser qualities. On the basis of developing, first of all, in stages, lesser qualities, you make your way to the development of greater and greater qualities. That's to begin with. Then it says, however, if a lesser person trains beginning with the more advanced ones, the more advanced thoughts will not arise and the lesser ones will be cast away. So nothing at all will be developed. So if you have that intention to train in the sense of the path of those of the great scope, and yet your mind is still governed by strong anger, attachment, and so forth, and that your mind is very susceptible to those afflictive states of mind, your mind will not be receptive to the teachings of the great scope. Your mind will not be open to listen to those teachings and take them on. So therefore, it is important to train in stages so that you'll be able to make your mind open to teachings of those of the great scope.
Koma tri chope ranam ne yamba metos ranam ne yamba metos lodum kigobani ranam ne yamba metos.
In finishing the reading of this section, it says, moreover, through being taught the common path and through training, those with a good fortune of superior capacity will soon develop excellent qualities that had or had not arisen before, whereby they can be guided to higher and higher levels once the lower ones have arisen. Thereby, the path will not be prolonged.
Lamrim said, and so that Jangalam Tunga Chimbi, Lamrim Chumbi Chesel Zevi Kavia, Hanidi. Then Jangalam Tunga Chimbita, Hani Somba Islam, a ship reward. For Japanda Adisha, that Lamki Brahma said, Lamrum, was significant. The Confucius is that the Lamki Rumba Drogo said, German Stone there, that needed round whichever the Mandas, Contour Sadi, and Sandy Stone, and Yaran Kibigi. And spend through song like a cool 2 years, and that this song was Lord Rim, here governs, do you want to Yabu Shivale, Sanjum the Shivi, and it Canelaya, and Novu Kibin, Novu Rip John, Pedajani, 까짜리 왔어. 아니 공부는 그렇게 양 반복 공부를 진행해 발레버 총 관심 공부 토도니 림딩해 발레버 오시 몬토 밀레기 남라 림진 비추버 송바당 아니 파버 토메기 양 아니 이 전주 삼반은 림기기 쪽 양다번 그렇지 심진 집이 실을 때는 정말 나위 취 때문에 제지 답이 당나 제수 때문에 제수 주고 제도 제수 주고 제도 지금 이거지 다 세럼 제도 때문에 돈 취 때문에 된다 당나도 제수 때문에 제수 주고 제도 다 세로 제수 때문에 돈이 취 삼모 때문에 당나도 제수 때문에 차가 제수 주고 제도 이 심전나는 전적으로 걸음 좀 대봐 있는 시송도 왔어.
Then the next section in the text shows the sources for the statement that this is how practitioners are led along the steps of the path of enlightenment. So we often speak about the Lamrim, and the Lamrim is mainly associated with Rinpoche, Jetsun Kappa. So Jetsun Kappa composed a text that some of you might know, the Lamrim Chema, or the Great Exposition of the Steps of the Path. He also composed the middling presentation of the Steps of the Path, which we study now. And there is also an abridged presentation of the Steps of the Path. So most of us think, when we hear the word Lamrim, we think, well, this is what was composed by Lama Tsongkhapa. Whereas actually the original Lamrim text was composed by Atisha, and the text was called The Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment. But then still, when we think of Lamrim, the Lamrim is mostly associated with Jetsun Kappa rather than with Atisha that composed the first Lamrim text. But anyway, if we think that it was Jetsun Kappa that invented this tradition of the Lamrim, which means that he invented this tradition of the steps of the path of enlightenment, Lama Tsongkhapa here in this section says that actually it's not my creation. The leading of disciples along those stages of development is sourced in the teachings of the Buddha. So not only in the teachings of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, but also in the teachings of the great Indian masters. So in order to prove that, Lama Tsongkhapa here pulls out some sources from the writings of Nagarjuna, Sangha, Aryadeva, and so forth. So it says, the need to develop the mind gradually is proclaimed in the sutra requested by the king lord of Dharanis, through applying the analogy of a skilled jeweler cleaning precious stones gradually to the meaning. Then it says the protector Nagarjuna also taught to gradually lead in the path of higher states and definite goodness. Nagarjuna said, first the Dhamma of higher states, then those of definite goodness come forth. Therefore, once you achieve higher states, definite goodness will come by stages. Then in drawing from Asanga's writing, who said, also in order that the side of virtue be gradually accomplished properly, the Bodhisattva initially teaches those who have the wisdom of childish sentient beings easy Dhamma and causes them to follow easy advice and instructions. Realizing that they have developed intermediate wisdom, it causes them to follow intermediate Dhamma teachings and intermediate advice and instructions. Realizing that they have developed vast wisdom, it teaches them the profound Dhamma and causes them to follow subtle advice and instructions. His beneficial activities follow those sentient beings progressively.
혼도 파신 대비 삼바장 되는 나는 죽수 림지 그거 손시 뒤 된뒤디 심전 담비 레전 담비처럼 죽어라 탑도 접어 산이기 기계를 받다는 손 시송 다디 지자 늘 상만로 아니 지 람기를 봐 아니 드달도 조그비 다지 공전슈디 다 차기여러 왔어.
And the final source that is used in order to prove is taken from Aryadeva's writing. So he says, so in his lamp of summarized behavior, he establishes that first the training in contemplations of the perfection vehicle, and after that, the mode of engagement in mantras needed to be gradual. Summarizing the meaning of this, he says, in order for beings who are like beginners to engage in ultimate truths, The means for perfect Buddha expounded resemble the steps of a flight of stairs. Which means that altogether in this section, Lama Tsongkhapa proves using scriptural citations that the guidance of disciple should be gradual, leading them in stages to the state of in the stages of development.
On did that the that Jeremiah Carso that Sondang Tomai was and it's so and Carson by the Donga to Carson by the so to said that then the double damage on the data Shimugo was and Yaran Kevin on that so the Ludri of the Soba and it's Papa Tomelo Soba. What did you show the ya beddi and Matu Bachi? Sawanin, Ransu Cinema, and Sonya looks at the Javatunga Balia, Sawanin does, right?
Now, when you follow the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa, the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, you see that he had a unique way of approaching those instructions or those teachings. So he presents a certain topic and then he presents the scriptural sources for that. So he presents a certain position and says that this position is presented, first of all, in the teachings of the Buddha. But not only that, also in the teachings of the Indian masters, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and so forth. So he does that in order to illustrate, in order to emphasize that it's not my own creation, it's not my own ideas of what needs to be practiced. There are authoritative sources for progressing in this way. So this style of composing a text and teaching is something that's quite unique to Lama Tsongkhapa.
On did that didn't know the Yaji and Hon the Persian taping Sambala Johnny, Henningal Jutsu Son Daddy, so that's Dongani, Sanji Chug, to Dundi, Dongani Namipa, Duoras, that's Doda Naslan, Nadi, that Tartubadi, and it's now the Lamria Johnny, and it's Sanji Kombo to Dichaguaza, Tinji Gibe, and it Tab Samodian, and it Don Shebi, and it Lamgi, but the Hidelaya, and it Maden Tamich, the corner of the Yunguavas, Chavanza, a patient Evasananga, and then Don Shebi, Lamgi Rumbasan, D, and Hendachi what is. Then Doeka the share to the Karislan, and it have a chamber with somebody, and Chanju Senda, Omani dog, easy the Chalgas. That D only have 2D, and in Ninjung Samba, and in Ninjung Sambi she's 2D, and in Megichu children. Kanji Kyo Chung somebody 2 devils. But the digitations.
And the last quotation that Lama Tsongkhapa draws from here is taken from Aryadeva's writing. So it establishes that first the training in contemplations of the perfection vehicle and after the mode of engagement in the mantra needs to be gradual. So here Aryadeva refers to the practice of sutra and mantra, or sutra and tantra. At the end, in order to become a Buddha, we need to practice tantra. We need to practice mantra. But then in order to practice mantra, we need to depend upon the sutras. And when we say that we need to depend upon the sutra, what we refer to is the sutra vehicle, or as we call it, the perfection vehicle, without which you will not be able to properly churn your mind along the stairs of mantra. So since in order to practice mantra, you need to rely upon, first of all, the perfection vehicle. And in order to practice the perfection vehicle, what you need to develop is the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, and wisdom that realizes emptiness. In order to do that, you need to go back to the stairs of path of those of the medium scope, to train your mind in the development of the determination to live cyclic existence. And you also need to follow the steps of the path of those of the small scope in taking up ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtues. Without them, the mind of enlightenment, wisdom, realizing emptiness, which are practiced in the perfection vehicle as the basis for the mantra vehicle, will not arise.
Somebody and tell it any given to somebody, tell them give somebody sambala, and on what to study, and give 단 통몽에 있으면 다 기우충이 삼바 장마들 두면서 다네 장 되게 이발을 숨세디 디 아니 기우충무당 통몽이 남기는 바 로장와 진단 통몽이 남기는 바 로장와 기우충비 남기는 바 로장와 방법은 숨 기우충 삼방무 삼바디 기비체 텔로 도사와 방법은 인지된 치마되니 로제와 지된 치마되비 탑된바 방법은 인지된 데리 면내바 치와 제수 참바 삼바 지된 치마 제달기와 조니 베두 삼바 오스.
And since this section emphasizes the importance of training your mind along the steps of the path of those of this medium, of the small scope and then of the medium scope, in stating how imperative it is actually to do so, then we can see that for us at the present, what is really important for us to do is to start with training a mind with the steps of the path of those of the small scope, and then make a way through the steps of the path of those of the medium scope, so that we can get to the training of our minds along the steps of the path of those of the great scope. And that being the case, let's look at what Lamrim says next. So when he explains the actual way of taking its essence, he makes 3 points. Training the mind in the steps of the path common to persons of small capacity, training the mind in the steps of the path common to persons of medium capacity, and training the mind in the steps of the path of persons of great capacity. Now, as we begin with training the mind in the steps of the path of those of which are common to those persons of small capacity, there are 3 main points to that section, beginning with the actual training in the attitude of person of small capacity. Then at the end, we will look at the measure of that attitude having arisen and clearing up misconceptions about that. When we begin with the actual training in the attitude of persons of small capacity, there are 2 attitudes, or 2 points, or generating a mental attitude of interest in future worlds or future lives, and relying on the methods for happiness of future lives. First off, when we generate a mental attitude of interest in future worlds or future lives, there are 2 main reflections that we take up. Remembering death, or becoming mindful of death, the thought that one is not going to stay in this world or in this life for long. And the second point is what things will be like in future worlds, future lives, thinking of the happiness and suffering of the 2 types of persons.
치워 마템바 간지 치워 마템비 님이 가르세요. 디다 취지하기 취진득이 아니 삼로 용약이다. 가서다 가서 주로디 아니 치워 마템바지 치워 마템바 디 딜을 투겨버지. 디송도스라.
So we begin with a reflection on our own death and impermanence. And this reflection here is explained in 4 main points: the disadvantages of not cultivating mindfulness of death, the advantages of cultivating it, what kind of mind that is mindful of death is generated, and finally, how to cultivate mindfulness of death. And when we begin with the disadvantages of not cultivating mindfulness of death, in short, we can say that so long as you're not mindful of your own death for that long, you'll still be prevented to a greater degree or a deeper degree from the practice of Dharma. So if you don't think of death, it is likely that you will not practice the Dharma.
These are the day Kasoda, Manzada to Tobaros, Chevana, and it show Matemba Tidan, show Temba Tidan, and it choose Chien Ivolia. And then Java career said, on a show Madonna, church like has new said. Indeed, church give by another, and it a lange regulars.
So just studying it like that might give rise to a certain question in your mind. First of all, how is it that thinking of death, becoming mindful of death, will make you practice the Dharma? What's the link between them? Or adversely, if you're not mindful of death, how is it going to impede your Dhamma practice?
That he bit Devachimo, Kanzana, and Shivananji, Shugi, Gorodi, give chung with somebody to us. Give chung with somebody to the, and give a jessin, give a jen, give a chimanamsu, and it's dendron royalia, some tangueri, some township shelters, but give a j said that she said the chiguaras, tinti, chick. 이것이 간직 하시마도 비다 치세는다 제토고 여기 상부디 슈체모지아나 아니 깨와 제네 나리야 깨와 디디치 랜다 마넨세디 양 도발레기다스 다디 랭고요나 규긴 가르고리생 대한 도바이거다 또 지원디게 깨와 지기 세는다 치토그리생 상부디 인지미 슈체모지 and church area, what Google does, right?
So we start with the steps of the path of those of the small scope. And the steps of the path of the small scope are concerned with what will occur to me in my future lifetimes. How will I be able to secure a succession of lives in which I'll go from one good rebirth to the next? So a succession of a pleasant states of rebirth. What are the cause and conditions that I need to get in order to make that happen? So in order to think about it, we first of all need to think, am I actually going to go through that process, going from this lifetime to the next and from next life to the one after that? Is it going to happen to me? And what are the cause and conditions that control that process? Now, what are the cause and conditions that I need to practice in order to make sure that when I go through that process, it will lead me to a pleasant state of existence.
But the design on the rooms, the Karina, Manzuliati, Javachiato, Tawasa, Ingras, Penang, do still churching it, the marching it, told her some Damana, and she Pena, Perdo, and she doesn't tell it, Yalan, the Manolia. And churching it, rather chung into Jimana, Mang Chedi, gave a chalice, how do you hear of Jimana? And Annie and Jungi and Tawa Jungi Jina, Yajaman should be Tawa Jungi chalice, and Jahana Dandichaya to be Lomiachina, and the Tawa Anichina, and the Mambu, and the Tawa, Kanji gave a mangus. Then a those Chichulo Leonie. And children do sit down the Megi Nanoya, training with the Munchadi, Gacha Pesh Tuju Dunju, Gacha Tuju Dunju, and the Shashabaina, Gacha Dunju Jeju Saris, Pomomontis, the Valina, Pomomontis, Terin and the Posakashi, then on the Munchadi, the training the Pomomontis, being on the Carres. Drawing Chavana, yours at the Nangado, the Cultivate, and the purpose of Chemani and Cardes, and the download chapter, and the Carchona Chon Samsung, the download indicated your one and a chilla Magawa, one a church, never one nga logo Sudovi, nga Shirman Samsung, somewhere Tinder Cardes. Drawing Chivan, she's such a boss.
So we can ask those questions, and also we can also try to posit those questions in some form of cultural context. Like, for example, looking at Tibetan society, not only inside Tibet, but also in India. So in terms of monastic society, there are more monks than nuns. So you could say that monks are the majority, nuns are minority within the community of monastics. More men are inclined to join the ranks of monasticism than women. Then looking at the laity, lay community, particularly in the East, there is a vast number of women engaged in study and practice than men. And also we can say that also when the Dhamma is now available in places like this, Australia, or in other places in the West, then Geshe feels that when you look at the people that attend Buddhist teachings, that do the practice, there are more women that do it, that are interested, engaged in Dhamma study and practice than men. So why is it like that? It's sometimes interesting to just look at that from a social perspective, historical perspective, social perspective, and so forth. Why is it that in terms of joining the ranks of monastics, it is still, you could say, predominated by men? But then when you look at the community of the laity, in terms of the people that study practice, there's a predominance of women in those communities. I guess let's say that at least here, when we look at least this room, there, it seems that today we have actually quite a few guys in the room. But normally, when we look at, Geshe reckons the percentage of people that join or that come to Buddhist centers in the West, there are more women than men. So why is it like that? Is it that the heart of men is coarse? Is it that we have a rough heart? Is it that we are disinclined to think of what will occur to us in the future? Is it that there's a sense of bravado, thinking that even if something happens, I will be able to deal with that? It's not a big deal. It's interesting questions to ask, don't you find? Shugila?
In IMI, there's more nuns, and more nuns stay away.
That's one thing, yeah.
And the other thing is when the said about the coarse-hearted males, I don't want to
Cold-hearted bastard.
But His Holiness has talked about that many times, about the need for development of compassion, and that women that much more naturally.
So probably has to do with the cold-heartedness of guys. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll just repeat it for the people at home. So Venerable Chuki said that looking at the IMI, which is the FPMT International Mahayana or monastic community. So there are more nuns than monks in that organization, in that community, but also more nuns stay ordained than monks stay ordained. So that's one fact, but it's nice to know. The second one also is honest, says that in terms of the development of compassion, it seems that women have kind of maybe a more natural aptitude or ability to develop compassion than men. Yeah. FMT기 chart 아니기 전부터 소과딜라. 야 타발에 아니망아요레스. 양 잡도 주한 내야디 로만보데야디 아니망아요레스. 차와된데 차와로야야는 도마타 근데 망아용데스. 데 직체. 단이바디안 데 갸르모체기 가르승비레스 나 닌제키야 디 패션 부메 닌제 공원이나 테슬레라 된도지 yosares ranchigi lela yosares sunshas. So that being the case, then Venerable Chuki, are you a compassionate person?
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
Work in progress. All right.
Karese, di chico redo tangani di chic ma yoya gyunzen karina se. Tangan dini ko this ma yoya chikipa shuji mayo yagi nenga ro the call to days. Ra kebi rig che toman che di. Ani yoada kema rigi ani che toman che kema ma yobat gyunzen di the Niji Chejung just Lamnati love to rivers. But these are Taras Parallel Manu Yachi, Tomonchi, yes.
Anyway, those are questions that we can ask. Why is it that there are more women than men in the community of those who engage in the Dhamma in a place like that, or in general in Buddhism? Why is it that there is a lesser number of a smaller number of men that do it. Is it because women have a greater aptitude for compassion? Is it for that reason, or is it for something else? Anyway, Geshe brought up those points, those questions, just in order to light things up. In case you become a bit bored, then it's good. Sometimes it's also interesting just to look at those questions.
Not being a male, I can't really comment on what other people think, but I'm just looking at some shy and being around and things like that. It seems to be sort of for toughen up, man up, supposed to cry, you know, don't show your emotions, sort of stuff, you know, even those sports, teaching what told a young child, you're only allowed to cry twice or something, otherwise you don't go on the ranks or something. Male, and I thought, so long. So, you know, I think there's definitely the ability to be compassionate, open-hearted and all that, but society is sort of told them, you know, show your emotions, like they go to the doctors, but nothing else can help. Sort of,
Yeah. Boys don't cry. Who's saying that? Who's that? Okay, boys don't cry. Anyway, yeah. De la de nga tsu luxula wa nga tsu luxula pena di lobcha di la so va ya di pula kala gyures na dinde mich kasa mich shue mare un yo mare dinde chago chego gres kje de la yang gyunsan chi yore so luxu pamel gyuntan lobcha la gyuntan pula dinde tis chago chego gre dinde ngwa ina sop dinde chagres kje di ante wa chi yosares. All right, so we had a couple of comments from the female side. What about the male side here? Rob or Gary? Gary, probably you have something to say about it. Why is it that we have more women than men in the Dharma cycles?
Well, I think that in the time that I've been around in Dharma, there's been great social change, social movements and with circumstances and situations change. But my conception with the number of Western people that I know and others who've met in the Dharma, there is still very but there has been a propensity for with that couple for the male generally to have to go out and work in order to support the family. And the females have a tendency to have a little bit more freedom to be able to do activities. Now, I really don't want that to sound like a sweeping statement.
Yeah.
It's just an observation and it's changing.
Yeah. I mean, kind of the gender, you're saying that the gender roles kind of are changing, kind of not as they used to be before. You know, before there was an expectation of men to go out and work. You know, so you could say that, you know, some, you know, women had more time. Now it's changing, so you don't want to make a sweeping kind of.
There's more of a balance.
Yeah. More of a balance.
Males who are known without children while they're trying to go to work and all that changing. I don't for a minute want to refuse the idea of females having more much
You don't want to land in hot water,
No.
in short. All right. Dila, and so examining the Tewaina Ross, Nobamidra, the Lucid Tewaina, and that 다 보면기 토탄단 보면기 라왕단 산로탄단디 네수 냐마 두아이나 네수 교도르와 제사베시 딜라얀 산로탄다 사바치 사발레야 사바케아딜라얀 딜라 조아치 여 보면 mambaden hume mambochi kime mambochi 산로탄다 사바 the titolo sanno tante gere di palam chiche shambade yang natso nyamane luksu tsowa ketan kande chiresna pogi lengen so di lega jea pesha soya mitsang kyongwa tende lega so diro ani shamba chewa ina tes yabutsigi males Anyamane Pumela and the Dutsum Tes Mangayota Shamba Dewaina, Lobjan Chewaina, Chewaina Jigio Re somebody. Tanda Nesu the young Gio Jogi Yotsan, Tanda Chur Lobjan Che, Pumanga Manga Young Resa.
Mama.
Ren Manga, Niamade, Jet,
Boy.
Mikia Kapsula. Niama the Lobjan Mikia, Lobjan Che, Mancha Kimera. Tanda pu manga yung res pensena tensayam pugi lengen so di chiwa legaja precious dian samotanda gyoto res kashi nala po taga digres kashi di kimen chiwa legalen kyo na den de yan sigro chesan chizo gyoto res Roberto?
Yeah.
It's a complex question, but I think
You can do it, you're a man.
that's right. In Australian culture, well, for a start, I mean, there's a construction of masculine sexual identity, quite different in all cultures, because it's constructed. So at a certain point in the male's life where the identification of the female has to be forcibly broken. The child identifies with the mother. Every human male and female comes out of the wood. At a certain point in the male's life, it's going to be forcibly broken through initiation. And then it's reconstructed in different models. And that varies very much in different cultures. And Anglo-Australian culture, and England culture in particular, there's a lot more militaristic emphasis on English society grew out of Henry VIII, who destroyed monasticism completely in England, which he wanted solved. So he militarized the society. So all the spiritual pursuits were marginalized. And he developed an empire of soldiers, militaries, and religions, where spiritual pursuit was marginalized. Monasticism wasn't existing. So we've inherited that. And, you know, it's masculine identity in Anglo culture, proof of that. But in Australia, I think we've got a lot of that masculine identity, which is about not seeking. Narcissism is very marginal in the West. But so I think, and it's an emphasis on self-reliance, on wealth, on good work, construction and identity. And there's very little understanding that narcissism is actually the hardest root, much harder root. And the reliance on charity for others is quite a contribution to Western masculinity, where suddenly you have to rely on charity, you have to ask, or you have to beg, live purely. And that's particularly in Anglo culture. There's more of it in the Irish culture. I think there's definitely a strong spiritual Aboriginal culture, which I think is unique aspect of Australia. So it's more of that undercurrent. So all of these factors make it difficult as a male. And then also the males in society keeping shadows for the goats is not understood. Right? So, and you look around the entire world, blessedness is going to be. It seems to pop up.
Yeah.
People got tree for years and I just have to remind them that the rest of the 5, 6, 7 years to be a surgeon. Spirituality, understanding the mind itself. But yeah, it makes it's a I mean, the Buddha instituted monasticism, counter-militarism in society. No institution exemplifies freedom. So the army was a monster. So you look at the West, you know, you've got armies everywhere.
Yeah.
And now these.
So you're saying that it's mostly kind of from a historical perspective, it's kind of many years of cultural indoctrination, so to speak, or conditioning, rather than indoctrination. It's conditioning that society kind of that's going to be the male role, to be kind of more militaristic, with a militaristic vibe confines. So therefore, you have to be more self-reliant, more self-sustainable. Relying upon others is a certain kind of a sense of weakness. If you rely upon charity, it demonstrates a weakness which is not encouraged in society. So kind of got to get a job.
Instead of the understanding that yes and no, that's what Indian society was like. That's 2,000 years ago. So it's a no. You do that. Whereas the rest of the world is still being sacrificed and getting each other up. So it's impressive that that happened in India. But then understanding, I think you need to pick out the art campaign. More advertising, like the military ads.
또 림버디 쉐도 너도 채워나 양지 the dura mambochila the inchilongbangi lokso the kandechi cheveresena potenso mamida oche chego gre chago sanotandan chago Tsultirm pago chechewaina semba sanotan sobsobdo the chagres then the cheyo mares so ranso tuba then the sogo gres because in mami la zug mazona yan so mitse kietan dian chago then the chego gres ani semba chewaina chuda ochi lobrin chewaina nyamlen chewaina chawata ani yan chawa chegi dobachi and the 가서 차고 매바 세계레스 섭소 세계레스 아니 안 차와 체와이나 주체와이나 소 단지 칼라 롱고 그래 그래서 롱고 그래 요저 롱고 그래 삼네디 제자전은 록소디라 야고시다 책이 말레스 그래서 소소 차고 란투투가 근데 지금 말레스 Ninga dodo dendo, ninga so dires.
Nanzu bela dinje das nima. Ani pu music di logo medio version neganga tonjon chebe. Yari yap tuni. Yari yamne sosu tawgo ni. Sosu matarna be di meganga gi chali gang so. Chidang dinje komshi di bela ina dusra.
In some sense, this is also similar to Tibetan culture, where before men were expected to be tough, not only to be tough, but also to be feisty, like ready to pick up a fight with others, and not only to pick up a fight, also they were expected to win the fight. And if they did not win a fight, people ridiculed them. So that used to be quite common in Tibetan culture.
And more Greece ama mullavda gehida.
Oh.
Lavda na lojin for the pomochi figure that. Shingra janji sonasila.
So Grace Mom, you teach at uni, right? No.
Mukuda.
So I think the Geshe is talking to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you teach at uni, right? Do you teach at university, or
I did.
you used to? So, what's your impression in general about kind of just gender roles among students?
I think that is changing a lot.
It's changing a lot.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think there's more awareness of the social construction of gender.
Mm.
And even in the media, there are less discussions about this and lots of debates about, even to the point of people not wanting to link the gender to the person. So I think things really changing.
So do you find that?
How much that the nurture versus nature
Hmm.
goes on. Certainly, when you start looking at the toy aisles and supermarkets, you realise how much of it is destructive.
So do you find that in your early years of engaging with students, there was a more kind of strict expectation from male staff with students and other expectations from female students, or?
Personally, I'm seeking awareness of that to students based on their gender. But I think that awareness is strong.
All right.
There can be a tendency in to talk to female students, male students, especially in the
Yeah, I mean, this is part of our conditioning, isn't it?
certainly in the most formative years, we can treat
Hmm.
kids differently without even realizing.
All right. So just for the people at home, kind of, I think that the main point is that it's also kind of changing quite a lot. The traditional gender roles are changing not only in the school system or education university system, but also when you look outside of that, supermarket and so forth. You can see that kind of in many different ways, the gender roles are changing and kind of opening up to also to be more inclusive, but also to allow people not to define themselves in a strict way as fitting definitely this camp or the other camp. That's in general what you're saying, right? Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, but it's kind of, yeah.
Active toys, domestic toys, girls, I think that's still very real. But there's much more, things are shifting. Even Barbie does more things these days.
Yeah. Even Ken can wear a dress. All right.
But yeah, I mean, just to try to recently, that's just one example.
All right, I've missed out on that, but anyway. Yeah. Quran the Quran Tsultirm lo chala Quran 그래서 아마도
예.
다들 남미하고 동도 Quran 안디 lo chala 양 neso di gyoto 그랬어. 다디 단다디 폴라 케제세탄 포몰라 케제세탄 니아말레 테스 gyotan go 그랬어. 된 gyo 하천체 뭐 말했어. 칼레칼레 gyoto 그랬어. Yama po dagaran chego gre, pomo dagaran chego gre, kunzo chupa yamna san tantan dego gres, pomo sanlo tantan dagaran go gres, ne chicks sanlo tantan chi yorwa. Ta de yang gyoto gres. Lopto tenso yan kashi kashi poin, pomoin, skare imians, so tacho egi rawan chia den jogerwa. De chiche. Ta de gan la yan de songala doina. 아니 사쇼테 와이나야 폴라케셰세 담포몰라케셰상 칼레칼레 조기레사 다 하찬데네 기와 침보 만도나야 다디 프랑스나 탄다 냐마 도와이나 네츠 기와 조기레사 Gary, it seems that you wanted to say another.
I hope this is relevant. Going back about 40 years. And in that retreat, there was 3 ladies who were quite and one of them asked one of the questions about women's liberation. And
About?
some very, very carefully
Yeah, she asked a question about what? Sorry,
Women's
women's liberation. All right.
Lama listened very, very carefully, asked a lot of questions, practice. And eventually he said with a big smile on his face, "Oh, now I understand what you mean. In the people will relate." So maybe it's all about balance.
그런데 돈인데 지셔로 단예마 로 십주스구나 디라 라마 예시 슈베캅스마얀 콘조디라 슈로 전체도 몸에 독단 캐치시 치엔 디라 베시키메 니숨된네 요레서 디토라 큰트이네 치와탄데기도스 근데 디라 라마 예시가 치와만 못하네 콘조돌리만 못해버와 그래서 디 라마 예시기 타마라 타 가르쳐 버렸으나 톱단 세야디 아마 타르파토에디 세야디 미 타마라 되는 거 그래 포탄 품 니가라고 그래서 다니암 되는 거 그래서 근데 저도
just picking up on that because I wanted to say our Lama Geshe very much not having the cultural baggage that we have. And so like when Lama Geshe made sure that nuns got the same education as the monks. And so we saw that come to fruition with the Geshe Mas and the cocaine Geshe Mas being top in top grades within the graduation. So that it's very visionary at that. And we're seeing the result, and it's really like it's in our minds.
근데 그런 니에말라마의 시기 산로 단단디한 부모라든지 따도야고 제발했어. 그냥 고방고마라 아니라든지 로존야고 제고 그래 세마라 공소 로존 야고 제발았더니 제마라 게시마든지 튕게라도스 세상아서 산산 포단 부모세야 되나 슈침보 짐바탄 셴바요나야 가시가시 된데 슈침보 징이마레스
Okay. 네, 이 저런 산점된 공부 학교 드려졌어가 먼저 이 미리기 예언해봐, 분미 예언해봐, 아니 간지 사망고기에 아니 이래야 장어여봐, 소수 대화도야, 소수라 장어여봐, 동아세디 소수라 장어여봐, 자냠티 콜로니동아 주지 공아야 송샤기 아니 발급지가 디마 창지 손지 윤진 진인 속에다 로종고 만담이 타샤지 모도 안지 나 산지점 내지게 송야 파샤지 저님 단단 통구요 말이야 디리다 단단히 나야 땅한지 로종 가을 껴여서 델야지 미리기 엔지 슈치무여 대와 지 품이 엔지 슈치무여 대와지 윤거스 가지고 좀 야구야 기초기 아니 잔념 그 상로다 아니 레고라스라 이 마음바이는 레고라스라.
Anyway, the Buddhist teachings originally were based on recognizing the equality of all living beings in terms of seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering, regardless of one's gender or ethnicity and so forth. Basing all our study and practice on the recognition of the equality of all of us, but also having the same right for happiness and to avoid suffering. And the same principle is still carried in the Buddhist teachings 2,500 years later without leaving anything behind, in the sense that without none of them being lost along the generations. So we might engage with the Buddhist teachings still with a mind that strongly clings or adheres to one's ethnicity or gender and so forth. But there is a hope for change. If we really take our study and practice sincerely, then a change that comes to see the equality of all living beings, regardless of the gender, ethnicity, and so forth, will come.
Thank you.
So let's do some dedication. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen and rise and grow. May that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the Snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You uphold the subduous moral way, who serve as bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Marjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Sever of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you. And we have, I think the Izana Sadalama is giving teaching today and tomorrow. So we're going to screen the teaching here at the Gompa at 1:30. If you're still here, you're welcome to join us.
So that will be meditations and
다들 산장 가르스는 직업 성별로 그 롱 직업
가슴.